Hey, we're going to go ahead and get started. How are you all doing? My name is Jerry Saavedra. I'm with the American Heart Association covering the city of El Paso. I want to first thank everyone for joining us tonight. Next slide, please. I do want to first just recognize that this is being put on by the El Paso Complete Streets Coalition. We're a collection of local and national organizations working in common cause to support improving street safety and the overall health of our community. So really want to recognize all of our partners across the city. And just to kind of set the stage of norms and expectations, this is the first dad joke of the day. So we're recording the forum. So I just wanted to let you all know that up front. There's going to be 2 panel discussions for the majority of the conversation. We want to make sure that everyone utilizes the chat box for questions and comments. This is really something where we want to be interactive. Participants, you're not able to unmute, but the chat box will be the main place to, if you hear something you like, let us know via the comments. If you have a question about something, put it in the chat box. The panelists as well are going to be looking at the chat box. So if there's questions as we go throughout the couple of panels, you're able to, answer in real time. We think that'll be the best bet. We're also going to have some poll questions. We want to have different ways of hearing what you guys think about the different topics that we're going to be discussing. So please participate in those as well. And questions will be answered both over the chat and through the audio. So without further ado, can move on. So just to kick us off, we did want to just define what complete streets are. And this first definition, I'll just go ahead and read it the way it is. It's a design approach that serves to create connected, resilient, and equitable transportation networks that ensures equitable access to community resources for all people, including those who walk, bike, use a wheelchair, use public transportation, or drive. So that's more of like a technical definition. And then a more simple one is simply complete streets are streets for everyone, no matter who they are or how they travel. And I think traditionally, our roads have been designed with the primary focus being cars and traffic, and in that lens. And so complete streets is just saying, let's look at it as from a holistic perspective of all users. Just want to level set everyone there. And this graphic here just kind of shows a little bit about that, where you can see how everything's all connected and taking into account the mom with the stroller, the person that has a wheelchair, or the bike rider. And to kick us off for the evening, I did want to start with a poll question. So we want to, just to kick us off, how important to you is having El Paso streets designed with all users in mind? So again, we're talking about walkers, runners, bike riders, older adults, people with disabilities. Is it very important to you, somewhat important, or not important? We'll just give folks a couple of minutes to answer that. It's about 10 more seconds to select your answer. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll. So great. I think we have a good audience here. About 88% of folks think it's very important, 13 somewhat important, and nobody thought it's not important at all. So I guess you're at the right webinar for tonight. You can move on. So just to kick us off for our first panel, I wanted to hand it over to Gabriela Gallegos to introduce our first panel. Gabriela? And panel, you can come off, share your video and come off mute.
So thanks, Jerry. So my name is Gabriela Gallegos, and I'm here in 2 capacities. I'm an associate professor at UT Health School of Public Health, working on, healthy eating and active living kind of projects. And I'm also the president and race director for Race El Paso. So I've produced events in El Paso for over 10 years. And with us today is Alfredo Austin, who's the bicycle program coordinator for the city of El Paso, and Dr. Jennifer Salinas with Texas Tech's University Health Science Center, as well as Ismael Herrera, the associate state director for outreach and advocacy with AARP, and Scott White, who's the policy director for Velo Paso Bicycle Pedestrian Coalition. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So we wanted to start off by just, considering, many of us are very well aware that El Paso has been highly ranked as a very safe city in this country for a good number of years, but we have a different kind of situation when it comes to pedestrian safety. So I wanted to invite Alfredo Austin to talk to us a little bit about the state of safety for pedestrians in El Paso.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Awesome, great. Well, good evening. My name is Alfredo Austin. I'm the bicycle program coordinator for the city of El Paso, and my job is the implementation of the city of El Paso's comprehensive bike plan. Now, complete streets policies is something that's critical to the implementation of the city of El Paso's bike plan because of its goal of creating safe and accessible streets for all users, as mentioned before, regardless of ability, income, or mode of transportation. Now, I am also part of the City of El Paso's quarterly fatality cross-functional team, which is tasked with the review and the analysis of every single traffic-related fatality collision. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is some information that was recently provided to City Council as part of the cross-functional team, in which shows the trends that we see related to fatal collisions in the city of El Paso. And you see clearly that there has been a drastic spike on pedestrian fatalities starting with 2016. We do see a drop in 2020, which we know it's been kind of a different year because of the COVID situation that we've been facing. But we still had a total of 11 fatalities up to pedestrian fatalities up to Q3 of last year. And in addition to that, Q4, we had a total of 13 more deaths with one more pedestrian fatality. Now, one of the things that we do with information, if we can go to the next slide, please. So with information, we're able to create heat maps that show some of the problem areas that we have in the city. This is for 2020. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, this shows the heat maps for the traffic fatalities from 2015 all the way to 2020. And we use this information to target our efforts when it comes to safety in our corridors. And we have a trend here where we see that most of the problem areas are major arterials, where we see some of the problems that Complete Streets is trying to fix, such as speeding, overbuilt roads that only account for motor vehicle traffic and often forget comfort of vulnerable users. Now, this is related to safety on our streets. Now, there's also a big component to Complete Streets, which is the public health, which will be discussed by Dr. Salinas.
So in addition to knowing that pedestrian safety is an issue, this ties into creating opportunities for active living and getting people out on the streets. And of course, we want more people to be active so that we can have some way to combat diet-related diseases that are very prevalent in our community. So we're thinking of obesity and hypertension and other diet-related diseases. So Dr. Salinas, will you share with us a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so the work that I do is really around obesity and obesity prevention, and really trying to understand what kind of factors are important in predicting obesity so we can prevent obesity and, of course, the related chronic diseases. Excuse me. So, there's clear overabundance of literature that regular physical activity is really key to the balance of healthy weight and really is key to obesity prevention. And there's numerous studies now that show that obesity is really the key modifiable risk factor in our population, but across Texas, across the United States, to reduce the risk of numerous chronic diseases, including 13 cancers. Many people are surprised when I say cancer because we always think of diabetes and obesity and hypertension and things like that, but there's also a very strong link to cancer. And we also know that El Paso really has a disproportionate burden of metabolic diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and things like that. So creating opportunities to improve physical activity is one way that we can reduce the impact of obesity on our community and potentially prevent these metabolic diseases that we see in our community. Next slide, please. So this here is a map that we created with the electronic medical records from UMC and from Texas Tech outpatient clinics. And what we did here is we compared what the nation thinks our obesity rate is, which is about 31.3%, compared to each of the census tracts in our county. So green and yellow is, you know, that the number was pretty close to what the national or the average or the estimate is for our county. And red and orange is really where, you know, we're well above. And so what you can see here is really, with the exception of the west side, the vast majority of our county is well above that 32%. Where in some census tracts, particularly along the, you know, southeast corridor of I-10, where the obesity rate is beyond 50%. So, you know, creating an environment for our community, and particularly these areas that are predominantly, you know, are hit the hardest by obesity, is really an important policy issue that we have right now. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of put it in perspective in terms of what we call county health rankings. So every county in the United States has been ranked by the CDC and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I want to use Austin or Travis County as a comparison, not only because it's our state capital, but Travis County is really about the same size of El Paso. So in terms of population size, actually, if we included Juarez, we have a much larger metropolitan area. But what you can see here, looking at, you know, adult obesity, food environment, physical activity, and access to exercise opportunities, we're lagging slightly behind Travis County and Austin. So there's some real opportunities for us to get to the point of Austin and, you know, make those improvements. I don't think we're that far behind. We just need a little bit of effort. Next slide, please. And so finally, this is, you know, the last slide that I'm going to show, just a comparison. So this is, many of you will recognize on the right-hand side is our bike plan. And many of those dotted lines, although this is from 2016, so some of those might be solid right now, but those are the planned bike paths that, or hike and bike trails that, you know, that we're planning right now that we're working on. On the left-hand side is the actual in-place hike and bike trails in Austin. And you can see here that the, you know, the infrastructure in a city like Austin is, you know, could potentially be contributing to, you know, opportunity and access that we saw in the last slide. So, you know, we have this plan, and, you know, with the right policy and the right backing behind it, I think that we have a real opportunity to, you know, to get to the level of Austin and show and see real visible signs of improvements to our health of our community. So that is, I think the last slide I have. Next slide. Yes. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just wanted to remind everybody, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Once we finish up the panel presentations, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. So, you know, many of us think about, you know, hiking and walking and strollers and kids on bikes and bike lanes for recreational folks or those who are, you know, traveling by bike to work. But there are also challenges for older adults and people with disabilities. So to talk to us a little bit about those is Ismael Herrera from AARP.
Thank you. Well, just like mentioned before, some of the challenges that a lot of Americans, a lot of folks in El Paso may suffer are overrepresented with older adults, such as diabetes and heart disease, but also people age 50 and especially people age 75 are overrepresented in pedestrian fatalities. This group is more likely to experience challenges seeing, hearing, or moving. Complete streets are an important part of building age-friendly communities, and they improve livability. If a street is safe for our most senior populations and people who rely on scooters and wheelchairs and other devices, it can be safe for everyone in the whole family. So that's why AARP views complete streets as an issue of livability and as creating age-friendly communities. And here you can see some of the challenges of on the last picture. I know we saw a gentleman on a walker, and this picture presents an obstacle for him. It's not the most ideal situation for most of us, but when you take into account these devices that a lot of older adults may use to get by, it creates a new challenge. So, yeah.
And wheelchair users as well, I think, would have, you know, challenges with streets and curbs and areas that might not be ready to facilitate mobility, you know, for all adults. So thank you so much for that, Ismail. And last, we have Scott White, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the challenges faced by bike riders, both commuters and recreational folks, so that, you know, we can discuss what happens when people are walking, running, biking here in El Paso. What does that look like?
Well, thank you, Gabriella, and thank you, Ismail, because you hit some good points there. We haven't designed our community for people. For the last, I don't know, 40, 50 decades, years, we have been focusing on really building our community around the idea of a car as your single mode of transportation. So when we talk about people who walk, people who bike, people who use transit, that's always an afterthought. And we can see that in just even how we talk about people who ride bikes. You see the picture right now. You have what are people that are known as cyclists. They're in their kits. They look like they're ready to go for a race. And we think of that as cycling. But there's other people who cycle. There are families, there are parents, there are children, there are people going to work, and they can wear whatever they want. This is not about a race. It's not about recreation. It's about a lot of people riding for a lot of reasons. And with that in mind, it really comes down to a key word: perception. It's how we think about people. Are they actually traveling? If we don't think of walking and biking as transportation first and foremost, we're not going to build the infrastructure for them. And we have seen that we lack the bike lanes, we lack sidewalks. I don't know how many times you've been taking a walk around in your own neighborhood and suddenly there's a signpost in your sidewalk. And that just creates a challenge that you have to get around. Imagine a mom with a big stroller or somebody in a wheelchair, the old got to the walker. All these people have to face these different challenges. And it's not just older people, it's younger people as well, because we build this infrastructure with the idea that those stop signs, when they're that high, do children look up at them? No, they're looking at other things. They're looking at other directions. So one of the biggest challenges across the board really comes down to designing for people versus building for cars. And that's first and foremost one of the biggest challenges we have. Then you've got who's actually designing some of this stuff. When you have people who don't ride a bike, who don't walk, who don't exercise regularly, designing bike lanes and trails and such, they're designing to a set of standards that's in some guidebook. They're not thinking about how it's actually used. They're not thinking about the context. They're not thinking that right over there is a school. So maybe on this trail, we need to connect that school to the trail. we also need to think about who these users are. Before you see a graph that kind of breaks down the percentage of who rides a bike. We have 1 to 3% who are the strong and fearless. They're going to ride anywhere and everywhere. You've got the enthused and confident. Those are mostly the people that you see riding in the kits. Maybe some of them are commuting to work. That's 5 to 10%. But the biggest percentage is really 50%, 60% of the population, the interested but concerned. That's the moms, the dads, the families riding together, the kids. And they're all people who want this infrastructure, and they want it designed for them and for their needs. Then, of course, you've got this 30% of no way, no how. Now, this is based off a study here that was done in Oregon. But if you go to other places where the infrastructure has actually been designed for people to walk and bike, you go to Amsterdam, for example, or Copenhagen, some of the biggest.
I'm not sure if everyone froze or just Scott, so I'm going to jump in. So, from the recreational, okay, then my call was right. So from the recreational cyclist, perspective, as well as from a runner perspective, it is also imperative to have safe roads. Recreational cyclists they're out on the road more. And so safety is a huge concern. And I know that there's, sometimes a move to start cycling indoors, because of fears over traffic fatalities and other things that could come to pass. When you're running, you have kind of the same issues that a lot of pedestrians have, but you are more likely to be using the street rather than sidewalks, right? As you should as a runner. And so the same sorts of issues come into play for, recreational safety. And so in order to create the opportunities for people to have more physical activity in their lives, which will, in effect, prevent the chronic diseases that Dr. Salinas was mentioning, as well as kind of just, enriching lifestyle generally and longevity, all of that has to be able to be done safely. So it is difficult to persuade people that they should be out running and biking and, doing the things that they love on El Paso's streets if their experience with it is that they had a lot of close calls, and that there are times of the day or only certain streets or only certain routes or only certain trails that they really feel comfortable using. And that has the effect of meaning that you have to drive to your recreation, right? So in order to ride your bike, you're driving your car to get somewhere where you feel safe riding your bike, rather than being able to be part of this kind of interconnected community where there are many different places to ride. So I think that there's the recreational side, there's the transportation side, there's the everyday pedestrian and, older adult, as well as wheelchair user and family that wants to be able to safely use roads in getting to school, work, and then enjoying their active lifestyle. So I'm not sure if we had any questions. I know that we were going to move on to a poll, and we are on schedule, which is exciting. But let's see. And if we want to go ahead and move on to the poll, or if there's Q&A to start with.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriella. Panel, that was a really great way to set up the challenges that we're facing in El Paso. Let's go on to a poll here. Here are some examples and pictures of different scenarios for riding a bike, going from the least protected, where you're just riding directly on the street, going all the way to number 5, where it's a protected bike lane, and then stuff in the middle. And so the question we had for folks is, what is the least amount of protection that you would be comfortable to ride a bike out in the street, considering normal traffic? And yeah, just kind of curious to see where folks are at. We'll give folks about 10, 15 seconds to get your votes in. While people are voting, I did want to make sure that folks know that when you submit a question or comment in the chat, I think the default is for it to only go to panelists. And so if you can please switch that to go to everybody, that way the panelists and other folks who are just joining in can also see the questions and the comments that folks are asking. So if you already submitted a question and it's only going to panelists, just if you can copy and paste it and send it to everybody, so we can make sure that everyone's is seeing what's going on and we're all there. All right, let's go ahead and close out the poll. What do we have here? 33% would be totally willing to just go right on the street. 4% want a little bit of a share, which can someone explain a little bit, like a 1 minute on each of these of what the design is and the differences? Scott, we'll turn it to you.
Yep.
Oh, good.
So,
Scott's back.
yeah, I'm back here. Sorry about that. Fighting the Wi-Fi. So the basic kind of infrastructure that we're looking at here is just on street is simply that. You're riding on the street, you're mixed in with all the other traffic that's out there. A sharrow is a mixed use lane that is designated and is supposed to indicate that you have a right to be there, and that marking, that symbol, indicates you have a right to ride in the lane. And technically, except for the paint that says that symbol, most streets and sharrows are exactly the same. Every lane is essentially a bike lane unless it's specifically prohibited by speed or whatnot. Then you have a bike lane where you have a simple bike lane is just 5 or 6 feet of space where you can have a single stripe, or you can have the buffered bike lane that just demarks your space, that you have clear space for you to ride in. And the wider it is, the better and nicer, except if it gets wide enough, people start thinking of these as parking lanes, and that becomes a challenge. And then the highest level of protection is the protected bike lane, where there is some physical separation. And so a protected bike lane would be example here of 5 or even a separated trail, because you have that physical barrier separation between you, which is some of the landscaping and whatnot.
Absolutely. Thanks for the rundown, Scott. Next slide.
Hope that cleared it up for everybody.
And did want to kind of transition over with a video testimonial from an El Pasoan that kind of wraps up what we've been talking about so far.
My name is Cindy, and I live on the east side of El Paso with my husband and my 14-year-old son. Prior to spring of 2020, my husband and I got regular exercise at our local gym, but COVID-19 changed that, and when gyms closed back in the spring of 2020, we opted for walking in our neighborhood. My family has a history of heart disease. I was diagnosed with high blood pressure in my early 20s, and that's pretty much the same story for most of my immediate family, including my son, who was diagnosed with high blood pressure when he was 8 years old. When we started walking in our neighborhood, we started taking notice of things that we really hadn't paid attention to before. For example, in the area that we walk, there are no bike lanes, and the sidewalks are too narrow for people walking, and even children on their bikes. Many times when we're walking, my son follows me on his bike, and right now that he's studying from home, that is his exercise, his PE. And so when he's riding his bike, many times he finds himself having to stop and pull over or move over to the street with no bike lane in order to make way for other pedestrians.
So I know the volume was a little bit low, but I definitely resonate her story with COVID and gyms closing, and then all of a sudden we're figuring out like, oh wow, my neighborhood really isn't what as safe feeling to run around. And so good transition to our second panel. If you all want to come share your video and come off mute, I'll go ahead and let our panel introduce themselves, starting with Emily.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Emily Schweniger, and I am the Deputy Director of Thriving Communities at Smart Growth America. Pleased to be here.
Great, David.
Hi, everyone. Dave Lofi. I'm the Texas Director for City Health and responsible for promoting the City Health policy package across the state of Texas.
And last but not least, Alec.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. My name is Alec Mandela. I'm a Senior Planner and Project Engineer here at Quantum Engineering in El Paso.
Great. I want to first start off with Emily, and I do want to thank her. She's in the East Coast in DC, I believe. Is that correct?
That is
And
correct.
it's 8 o'clock your time, if not later. So appreciate you staying up late and joining us. Smart Growth America is the lead top organization when it comes to complete streets. They have the National Complete Streets Coalition. So we're really lucky to be hearing from Emily, and I'll turn it over to you to give us your presentation.
Thank you so much, Jerry. And I am very pleased to be here for the cause, no matter what hour. Excuse me. So we're considering, how communities across the country are dealing with these issues that were shared in that video. This is something that many communities are facing in different ways to different degrees. But one of the sort of strategic routes is adopting a complete streets policy, which I know that there's a lot of work happening in El Paso right now to refine the complete streets policy. That's really exciting. We do house at Smart Growth America the National Complete Streets Coalition. It was originally launched in 2004, and it promotes the development and implementation of complete streets policies and professional practices by using a complete streets approach. And that approach is thinking about people and places when planning, designing, constructing, operating, maintaining our transportation networks. So, what was referenced in the previous panel that we've been building, streets for cars for many decades is quite the situation, and it's something that we're having to actively address and resolve. So looking at this graph, as you can see, it's red, alarming numbers going up. This is an issue that we're seeing that is getting worse. Dangerous by Design is a report that we release annually. It's actually going to be coming out in a couple of weeks, and this is a sneak peek at the data that we will be releasing in March 10th, I believe. And it's a national report on the deadliness of walking in the United States. All a product of our streets being designed, as we have said, to prioritize the movement of high-speed vehicles. And so in this report, what you can see, just in this graph alone, between 2010 and 2019, drivers struck and killed over 50,000 people while walking throughout the United States. That's more than 14 people per day on average. And the number of people who have been struck and killed over each year has grown 45% between 2010 and 2019. And what will be seen in the report is that Texas is actually on the list of the top 10 most dangerous places to walk as far as states go in the United States. It's actually number 10. The report also highlights the disparities in which people are at greatest risk of dying while walking. Older adults, Black and African American and American Indian and Alaska Native people, and people in low income, low resource communities continue to be disproportionately represented in fatal crashes involving people walking. Thank you. And why? Why is this a problem? Because across the country, again, we have built our roads for cars. And there are numerous ways that we prioritize cars over people on a daily basis, such as wide lanes that allow drivers to feel comfortable driving at higher speeds, areas without sidewalks or transit stops, missing bike lanes and crosswalks, and generally overbuilding for cars and underbuilding for people who might be walking, biking, rolling, or moving actively along our streets. Next slide, please. We know that design changes behavior. No two roads are alike, so design modifications need to take into account what type of road you are addressing. Are there local businesses that need to be accessible by a multitude of transportation options? Is there a community adjacent that might be impacted? All of these considerations must be taken. But if we know design changes behavior, then we need to stop making drivers, allowing them to drive at these high speeds and essentially at times become murderers. Making them slow down and making that speed reduction, that slowing down, the easy choice, and making stopping at crosswalks the expectation makes it safer for everyone. Narrow the lanes, mark the crosswalks, invest in safe spaces and places for people to use our streets. Not only will it save lives, but when people are able to safely move actively to their destinations, it's good for the climate, it's good for the local economy, it's good for their health, as we heard before about reducing chronic diseases, and it has many multitude of benefits. I did point out in the chat that people who use active transportation to get to their daily destinations, such as jobs, school, and other places, tend to get the required recommended amount of physical activity, and don't need to go to the gym. Here you see designs for high speeds and high volumes. For too long, we've measured the wrong results. This is how we end up with a road like this. Highways are being expanded at huge expense to save drivers a few minutes on their commute, and induced demand, meaning making the road bigger and more cars will come, continues to mitigate the value of those investments almost immediately in infrastructure time. Next slide. When we design for slower, safer streets and speeds, we're prioritizing people. And some of these changes can be made with very little investment. Here you can see a demonstration project which required just paint and some traffic cones to set it up. This can provide a community with an opportunity to experiment with changes to the road without major financial commitment, and even serves as an opportunity to educate folks on what changes are and why they are there. As you can see, there's an informative sign here around this traffic circle in South Bend. Changes to the road can and should also be built into regular maintenance and operation schedules and can become incorporated in the process of maintaining the roads. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. Next slide. This is a map that shows where complete street policies have been adopted across the country. There's over 1,400 policies nationwide, which shows that more and more communities are in favor of complete streets and recognize their values. In fact, yesterday, the 2021 Complete Streets Act was reintroduced by Senator Markey and Congressman Cohen here in Washington, D.C. The Complete Streets Act is legislation that would promote safer and more accessible transportation routes across the United States. There's a various, sort of way that is being approached, and I can tell you more about that if you're interested. But it's a really exciting opportunity that we have to essentially be able to allocate funds from the federal level for complete streets in all of the states. It's important to remember complete streets is a process, not a product. It is reflected in all of the decisions we make about how we fund, design, operate, maintain, and measure the success of our roads. It's not about any one project. Next slide, please. And a good policy should lead you to strong complete streets network. That's where you're headed. To get to that network, you need a process. And because, as we all know, building new infrastructure or retrofitting existing infrastructure requires resources and time, this is why the policy is so important. You want to embed that process into your day-to-day activities. Every time a community considers repaving a street or building a new development, the complete streets approach requires them to consider how and if they can make that project safe and accessible for all users, and that takes time. The traditional approach of transportation planning and engineering focuses on cars and even measures success based on how many vehicles it can move through a corridor, not counting the number of people. Next slide, please. For strong policies to build strong networks, you need to make sure your foundation is strong. This is fundamental. And adopting a complete streets policy is not enough. That policy needs to be structured in such a way that it will lead to the desired outcomes. Next slide. Smart Growth America and the National Complete Streets Coalition has worked to develop a framework that we recommend to build a strong complete streets policy. These are the 10 elements. And I did want to highlight the first few where we see vision and intent. This is an opportunity to define, what is the vision? And we would push for the equitable vision for how and why the community wants to complete its streets. Who will those streets benefit? It specifies need to create complete connected networks and specifies at least 4 modes of transportation, including biking or walking. We also look at number 2, diverse users. This is looking at some of the issues that I mentioned when I talked about the results from Dangerous by Design, which is that in our country right now, there are people who are being disproportionately killed on the streets. And as we know, this is going to take a tremendous effort to undo that harm. Benefits, need to be considered and invested in an equitable way. And in order to do so, complete streets policies need to identify who are their vulnerable users. In each place and context, that can be different, but we are looking at most underinvested and underserved communities as being priority populations for these types of investments and for this change. And then you see commitment in all projects and phases. I just wanted to reemphasize how Complete Streets is a process. It's not one project. It's not one pretty corridor where the trees have been planted, multi-million-dollar investment, and this is our downtown, and then we check our box and walk away. It is something that we need to do and embed into every decision that we make moving forward on every street that we have paved. And I will hand it back to Jerry. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. That was great information, and definitely appreciate the national perspective as we move forward here in Texas. And so I'll turn it over now to David. David, thank you for joining us tonight. I wanted to see if you can share a little bit about City Health, your work in Texas, and I know that you had some conversations in El Paso specifically, so just turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jerry, and yeah, real pleased to participate in the conversation, and really excited to see the interest in Complete Streets here in El Paso. City Health is a signature initiative of the De Beaumont Foundation and Kaiser Permanente, and we take a close look at whether the nation's 40 largest cities have 9 key policies in place that experts believe improve the health and wellness of cities and their residents. And we're certainly focused. I'm here in Texas, focused on the 6 largest cities in Texas, including El Paso. And each of these 9 policies were chosen because they're evidence-based, they're backed by experts, and they have a track record of bipartisan support. And so Complete Streets is an important component of the 9 policies that we track. And so, we take more of a health versus a healthcare approach because we believe, a wide array of policies that address everything from affordable housing to early education, tobacco control, access to healthy food. These are all critically important to the health and well-being of cities, and that includes Complete Streets. And so we work with leading subject matter experts to develop a scoring criteria for each of these 9 policies. And then we award medals, gold, silver, bronze, or no medal, depending on the strength of the policy. And we are proud to partner with Smart Growth America, who is our subject matter expert, and we enjoy working with Emily and the team at SGA. And so also want to mention one of our other policies is smoke-free indoor air. And as you all know, El Paso led the way as the first city in Texas to adopt a strong smoke-free policy back in 2002. I know we're approaching the 20-year anniversary of that policy, and because of those efforts, El Paso earned a gold medal in that category. And so, we tally up these individual medals and then give each city an overall medal, and then that is released in an annual report that comes out at the end of the year. And so, we know that no 2 cities are alike, and so our goal at City Health is to provide a menu of policies that local leaders and stakeholders can achieve. They're pragmatic, achievable, somewhat aspirational as well, depending on what the local priorities and needs are. And so, we've had some really encouraging conversations in El Paso, both at the city level and also with partners and stakeholders. And we've been really excited to see the interest in this topic. And so honored to serve as a resource to this group and to be asked to be part of the conversation. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that. And now I wanted to kind of bring it back to El Paso and bring in Alec here to just give us a little bit about what's been going on specifically in El Paso for Complete Streets and the effort over the last year and a half. Alec.
Hi, everybody. Again, it was Alec Mandela with Quantum Engineering here in El Paso. So over the past year and a half, we've been working closely with American Heart Association and the El Paso Complete Streets Coalition, which, as you can see, is a community-driven organization that brings together a broad variety of perspectives to advise and develop the Complete Streets policy. You can see, the group includes national organizations, regional health partners, universities, local businesses, and neighborhood associations. I just want to kind of touch on this to give you a bit of maybe a different perspective in how you think of streets. So in addition to their transportation function, streets are the largest form of public space in the city, and so they should be designed to balance the need of all users. Next slide, please. So the Complete Streets policy is based on 6 core principles identified by the Complete Streets coalition, and I'll just give a brief little description of each. So safety is the priority. Roads should be safe for everyone, ages 8 to 80. Equity, diversity, and inclusivity. This is a critical component emphasized throughout the policy, and it relates a lot to some of the points that Emily made earlier as far as targeting these investments in historically underserved neighborhoods and really creating some comprehensive outreach and discussion with community members to develop designs that work for everybody. Accessibility just emphasizes that the street should be accessible to our most vulnerable users all the time. Land use, this just takes into account the surrounding area around the streets and making sure that we're building the appropriate facilities in the appropriate place based on what's located there and what we expect to be there in the future. Economic vitality, so there's a lot of research that has shown that streets have a huge impact on retail sales, property values, city tax revenues, and a bunch of other things. So they should really be designed to maximize the co-benefits among all those user groups and contribute to the economic well-being of a city rather than becoming a burden through excessive maintenance and things like that. And then last, but definitely not least, is the environment. Streets can be used to help protect and restore our environment through stormwater management. They can even increase biodiversity and reduce ambient air temperatures to make walking and cycling more comfortable, especially here in our hot climate. Next slide, please. So Emily again mentioned the equity in implementation and retrofitting of existing streets. So I'm just going to go through a couple of traffic calming elements that can be implemented on both new and existing streets to make older neighborhoods and historically underinvested neighborhoods a little bit safer. I'd really appreciate it if you could jump in on the chat and add some locations where you think some of these things might provide some benefit to where you're pretty familiar with around the city. So this first one is a splitter island or a pedestrian refuge island. It essentially narrows the lanes and provides a safe place for someone to stand if they need a little extra time crossing the road in between cars. Next slide, please. These are curb extensions or bulb outs, and you can see they reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians. So this just reduces the exposure they have to vehicle traffic. It also benefits vehicles by reducing the amount of time that a pedestrian is in the road, so less likely that there'll be a collision. Next slide, please. So this is a speed table or raised pedestrian crossing. It might be a little bit difficult to see, but the point of this is essentially to bring vehicle traffic and pedestrian traffic onto the same level. You can see there's some kind of textured pavement there. There's the bollards that really help to narrow the road, and it just emphasizes that this area is designed and prioritizing pedestrians and cyclists. And then I believe there's just one more on the next slide. Discussion on crosswalks. Yes, so there are all kinds of different crosswalk designs, as you can see here. Some of them provide higher visibility, but I think the next slide really shows a cool way to take a traditional crosswalk, make it even more visible, and help beautify the neighborhood a little bit. So you can incorporate public art into crosswalk while still maintaining Department of Transportation standards, as you can see here. So that's important to getting city buy-in as well as neighborhood buy-in.
Yeah, Alec, and on this one, I think it's important to also mention that.
Next slide, please.
Can you hear me, Alec? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jerry.
I was just going to jump in. I was just going to add that, you know, sometimes people just see things like this and they just think like, oh, that's just to make it look pretty or whatnot. But, you know, it's also for drivers, it stands out more. And I think in the process, El Paso is doing a lot to try to beautify the city. Every time I drive around, I see new things that are popping up to add more of the culture of the city. And I think there's like some creative ways to solve both, making the city unique and fun. And at the same time, it helps drivers see the crosswalk. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, great point, Jerry. And then we'll just take a quick little look at some renderings that we've developed to kind of show you how complete streets can benefit a variety of different user groups. So next slide, please. This is an example of how complete streets can benefit cyclists specifically. This is Railroad Drive. You can see it was recently repaved and there's a wide buffered bike lane, but you'll also notice in the background the speed limit is 55 miles an hour. So If you could go to the next slide, please, you'll see an example of a fully built out complete street concept that completely changes the landscape. Here you can see a physically separated bike lane. Whoops. Okay, I guess I'll read. Here we go. Sorry, there might be a bit of a delay, guys. I apologize. But here you can see the physically separated bike lane, a reduced speed limit of 35 miles per hour, which is more appropriate for an urban roadway, some landscaping and lighting and all of the elements we've discussed that can help improve the street for everybody. Next. This is RC Poe Road. You might be familiar with this if you live on the east side. It actually provides access to the future Far East Transfer Center. And you'll notice right now it's 3 lanes with a center turn lane and then a bike lane on either side. But you'll notice that turn lane is super wide. So if you can go to the next slide, you'll see a reimagining of the street using the same amount of asphalt essentially and just some paint to creatively allocate space for all road users, including a separated bike lane over there on the right-hand side and a dedicated bus lane, which is a great thing to incorporate, especially with the investment in the bus rapid transit BRIO system to help ensure on-time arrivals for transit users. Next slide. I think we showed this picture before, but this is Yarborough Drive, and it just is a pretty classic example of some missing curb cuts, a pretty simple design feature that could really make this a lot more accessible. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see a reimagining that includes that accessible curb cut through the median, as well as some artistic crosswalks like we just talked about that really kind of help brighten up the area. You'll also notice there's some more appropriate landscaping in the median with some trees that provide better shade down here, which is, as we've mentioned before, a critical issue in our climate. Next slide. This, I think, is my favorite one. So this picture right here is just kind of a big asphalt concrete ditch known as Diana Drive, and you'll see it's not very inviting to a lot of people really, and there's kind of a big, almost a waste of space in the middle. So if we go to the next slide, you can see how just moving that guardrail from the outside to the inside, you can completely reimagine and activate this space, incorporating public art along the canal, creating a riverfront sort of idea by keeping the canal full of water. The beautiful thing about this, this area specifically is located really close to a lot of schools, especially middle and elementary schools. So by allowing students and families to walk down the center island here, you're actually reducing the number of intersections they're exposed to by over 50%, because not every street crosses the canal here. So it's just another way to improve safety using space that we've already allocated. And then we've got one more rendering, I believe, on the next slide. Well, a picture on the next slide and then one more rendering. So this just shows kind of your average neighborhood street. This is on Teetons Drive in the northeast. You can see there's 2 lanes in either direction. There's not really sidewalks or lighting or anything. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see a really, really beautiful development that narrows the lanes, provides a multimodal access with a shared use path on the side, appropriate street lighting, public art along the businesses. So really just kind of reinvigorating and reactivating the space and making it accessible for everybody. And I think with that, I'll turn it back to Jerry. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate that. And Alec, this might actually go to you, so don't go too far. But I did want to, one of the questions that we kind of hear a lot is, you know, many cities are currently facing budget challenges with COVID and everything like that. And sometimes complete streets, folks think it's like a big expensive thing and it's going to be, you know, we don't have the money for it. It's, you know, it's nice beautification, but is it really critical to the community? And so I guess I'll first turn over to you to kind of talk on some of the things you were saying about how it does benefit economically as well. And then if Emily or anybody else wants to jump in as well, we can start with you.
Sure. So I think probably the one on that slide that catches my attention first as someone who owns a home is that home values can be significantly increased if you live in a neighborhood that's more walkable. So the nice thing about that is it increases your property values, but it provides a great benefit to the city by increasing city revenues that way too. I think another one, and I know that this is a big issue here in El Paso, we have even just a little bit of rain and the streets completely flood, right? But incorporating some stormwater harvesting, such as bioswales and appropriate native landscaping along streets, can reduce runoff by up to 20%. And so that means you can handle that water on site, which also creates savings downstream in the sewage, the storm sewer systems and water facilities that El Paso Water has to develop in order to process all of that. I think another one that's really important too is that bike infrastructure and multimodal projects create a lot more jobs than standard car infrastructure projects. They also tend to use a lot more local materials than standard car and freeway infrastructure projects, so it creates more benefits to the local economy as well. I think, Emily, if you maybe want to jump in, I'm sure you have plenty to say about this.
Just a couple of comments. I know we don't have much time. One point I would make about the rise in home values is that needs to be considered along with strategies to ensure that there's no displacement of the communities around those areas, because we want these benefits to impact the communities that we're investing in, instead of just think of it as investing in people instead of investing in places. But definitely, I think there's also a lot of ways to think creatively about complete streets. People think about big infrastructure projects, but many times in some of the examples I shared, it can just require paint and a little creativity. There's a lot of models for demonstration projects or more long-term uses of tactical urbanism to get people on board. More than that, definitely building it into maintenance scheduling. There is so much money being poured into our roads all the time, huge amount of money. People think of complete streets as an addendum to, when it really needs to be prioritized within. And so if you start restructuring the way that those budget dollars are even being allocated, it can really change the way we think about what we can afford. I think it's also important to think about the long-term cost of things. And so, for example, many times we build these huge superhighways, and the maintenance that it requires to keep that concrete passable by vehicles versus what it costs to maintain a bike lane or a sidewalk is much more. So if we start doing sort of a fiscal impact analysis over the long term of what these investments cost, complete streets is actually very efficient.
And
I'll stop there.
Appreciate that. And I think one thing that kind of resonated with me, I was on another webinar on complete streets, and one of the panelists was saying, a lot of this is also of thinking about complete streets when it's through routine maintenance. And so it's not saying you're going to pass a policy and then tomorrow every single street's going to have a bike lane, every single project's going to include every single component. And it's more so like when there's routine maintenance and there's an opportunity to maybe add something here, add something there, use a little paint. Having the complete streets policy just gets folks to think about those types of things. And also with new development, I know El Paso's growing a lot. Getting it right the first time saves money from having to go back and then do things all over again, and you're wasting resources. So I think on that front, just wanted to highlight those two things. Eva, I did want to see if there was any questions that came in through the chat, not just for panel 2, but I know the first panel is still available.
I wanted to just say that I'm excited at how active the chat has been. There's been a lot of really great conversations going on, and I hope everyone's had a chance to just even listen or read everyone's own experiences that they have in their own neighborhoods. There's one question, and I think it's just important to also address the county of El Paso. There was a question asking if there were any discussions in place with county commissioners for those who live in the county of El Paso with an array of street and accessibility issues.
Anyone want to take that?
I can jump in on that one.
Go for it,
Jerry, if you want. So I don't believe we've had direct conversations with the Commissioner's Court necessarily, but we have been reaching out to regional partners, including like the MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which does allocate funding for roads throughout the county. We do have partners at the county that we've been discussing with. TxDOT as well, which has jurisdiction over some roads that are outside of city limits but within the county. So we're actively seeking partners regionally to make sure that this policy doesn't apply just to El Paso, but that there are quality connections between the city and the larger region as well, dedicated complete streets corridors, and that we can bring these to everybody.
Awesome, thanks. Next slide, please. We have a couple more. I know we're at time, but we just have a couple more things in the, well, Alec, if you could quickly just talk about the street audit, and we have a short video, and then we'll wrap up.
All right, guys, so this will be the last time you hear from me, I think, then. But we have been partnering with the Medical Center of the Americas to develop what we're calling a street audit. That's essentially a way for the community to provide some direct feedback on their local areas. It essentially asks some questions about the quality and comfort of sidewalks, street crossings, the existing or maybe the lack thereof of bike facilities on street, safety, lighting, all these kinds of things. We have a paper copy available, and we also have a Google form copy available, which I believe will be sending out to everybody who's here on the call today, or it'll be on the Complete Streets website at some point too. So I think the video that's coming up right now does a really good job of kind of showing the importance and the power that these audits can have.
Roll the tape.
Have you ever walked down the street and felt uncomfortable, felt unsafe, or struggled to get to your destination? We invite you to learn more about complete streets, street audits, and how to perform a street audit in this short video.
Una calle completa es un enfoque que requiere que las calles se planifiquen, diseñen, operen y mantengan para permitir un viaje y un acceso seguro, conveniente y cómodo para todos. Los usuarios de todas las edades, habilidades y medios de transporte deben poder utilizar las calles de una manera segura y cómoda. Las calles completas permiten un viaje seguro para quienes caminan, andan en bicicleta, conducen automóviles o viajan en transporte público.
A complete street should have elements such as the MCA VA clinic, the Playa Drain Trail, the intersection of Concepcion and Alberta. An incomplete street lacks elements such as the intersection of Paisano and Washington, the intersection of Paisano and Tobin.
Una observación peatonal ayuda a los miembros de la comunidad, voluntarios, planificadores, diseñadores y otras personas a identificar lugares donde los peatones pueden caminar de manera segura y donde se pueden hacer mejorías. Por ejemplo, cuando esté trabajando en la sección de evaluación Seguridad en las calles, necesitará identificar si los automóviles conducen demasiado rápido, si hay demasiado tráfico, poca iluminación en la calle o en ninguna, objetos u obstáculos, lotes baldíos o edificios deteriorados, perros sueltos, lotes abandonados o descuidados.
There are two ways you can use this form. Option 1, print the form and take it with you to your assigned street section. Fill it out with a pen or pencil, drop it off or mail it to your street audit volunteer. The second option is to open the form on your phone or tablet. The form should allow you to fill in boxes with your answers and type additional text. Once you complete the form, click Submit, and your form will be sent to your street audit volunteer leader.
Gracias por tu tiempo y apoyo. A través de esta iniciativa esperaremos aumentar la seguridad y lograr un acceso equitativo a las calles para los habitantes del Paso, de todas las edades y capacidades. Juntos hagamos que el Paso sea accesible.
Okay, so again, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We hope that if you're interested in participating with the street audits, please, we'll be sending out information about that. We'd love to get street audits all over across the city. There's going to be a 1-minute survey following this webinar. It'll take less than a minute to fill it out. If you can please do that. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Have a good evening.